It's a far cry from the grey skies and stifling gossip chains of the UK. Here, I get to choose who I am every single day, and I don't have to apologize for a single choice. That sounds truly wonderful, Al said softly, though the slight increase in his formality was a warning sign. Though to be fair, you are quite admired and supported in Britain as well. Meghan tilted her head, her tone now dripping with concentrated sarcasm. Admired? Is that what we're calling it now? I'd say relentlessly scrutinized, publicly villainized, maybe even targeted. But sure, let's call it admiration if it helps people sleep better at night. The words were sharp, delivered with surgical precision. Al's smile faltered just slightly, barely noticeable, but definitely real. He cleared his throat, regaining control with an effort. One last thing before the break, he said, the clip in his voice now evident. There's been speculation about you returning to acting someday. Is that something you'd ever genuinely consider? Meghan gave a dismissive, harsh laugh. Acting? I think I've done enough of that for one lifetime, don't you? The room went completely still. For the very first time, Al didn't immediately respond. He looked down at his notes, then back up at her, meeting her gaze squarely, his own eyes now cold. That's an interesting way to put it, he said finally, his voice level. Honesty is interesting, isn't it? Meghan shot back, a challenge in her eyes. Sometimes, Al replied softly, never breaking eye contact. And sometimes it's just unkind. For a fleeting, nearly imperceptible second, Meghan's eyes flickered, the faintest, most fleeting crack in her polished composure. But then her chin lifted again, her voice returning to its cool, defensive pitch. Well, I've never been one to sugarcoat the truth for someone else's comfort. The segment producer quickly gave the cut signal, but the raw, electric energy in the room refused to settle. Al leaned back in his chair, taking a slow, calming breath. Meghan smoothed her blazer with mechanical precision, her jaw faintly clenched. They were only halfway through the show, but everyone, from the sound technician to the head camera operator, could feel it. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a volatile countdown. The boiling point and the exit collision. When the cameras blinked back on for the third segment, the friendly, inviting facade of the Today Show had all but vanished, replaced by a tense, professional wariness. The glossy studio set, once filled with the warmth of morning banter, now felt more like a pressurized chamber. Even the ambient hum of the lights seemed sharper, more aggressive. Roker sat forward slightly, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his tone calm, but now clipped and focused. Across from him, Meghan Markle appeared utterly composed, perhaps too composed. Every movement, every breath was deliberate, as though she were intensely performing for a crucial, invisible audience. Welcome back, Al began, his voice steady and even. We're continuing our conversation with Meghan Markle. And Meghan, I'd like to ask about your widely discussed public image, something that seems to follow you, for better or worse, wherever you go. She gave a faint, knowing laugh. Public image? That's such a convenient, simplistic phrase, isn't it? It makes it sound like there's a dramatic difference between who I am and who people think I am. But I don't wake up in the morning asking anyone permission to be liked, Al. I just exist authentically. Al smiled tightly, his expression challenging. I understand, but I think what people are genuinely curious about is the perceived contradiction. You've often stated you value deep privacy, yet you've shared so much of your personal life through exclusive interviews, documentaries, even books. Some viewers wonder, how do you truly reconcile that choice? Meghan's smile thinned decisively. The famous contradiction question, she said, leaning back. I find it truly fascinating that people have such a hard time understanding basic boundaries. Sharing my perspective and telling my own story doesn't equate to surrendering my privacy to the public. It means taking essential control of the narrative that others tirelessly tried to hijack. Al nodded slowly, choosing his words with surgical care. So in your mind, that's genuine empowerment. In my mind, Meghan echoed, with a soft, dismissive scoff. No, Al, it's not just in my mind. It is empowerment. For far too long, people, and especially women, have been told to stay quiet, to be endlessly grateful, to just smile and nod at what they're given. I didn't move across an entire ocean just to play that stifling role again. Al gave a polite, measured smile. Fair enough. But critics have pointed out that some of your recent projects, like the podcast and the Netflix special, felt more like public rebuttals and counterattacks than personal storytelling. Meghan's lips curved into a distinct shape that was half smile, half warning. Regrets? Absolutely none. I think the real question, the more important one, is whether they have any. I made choices entirely for my well-being and the well-being of my family. And that's a concept some people still seem allergic to understanding. Al glanced briefly toward the camera, then returned his focus to her. That's a fair point, he conceded. But you've spoken previously about the importance of compassion and healing for the public at large. Exactly, she interrupted, cutting across him mid-sentence. And healing doesn't mean being required to revisit the past every single time a journalist needs an easy headline to fill airtime. The studio went quiet. Even the steady hum of the lighting rigs felt unnervingly louder. Al took a slow, deliberate breath, his professionalism a steel wall. All right, he said evenly, deciding to shift ground entirely. Let's pivot for a moment. How has life in California been for you and your family, specifically the children? Meghan relaxed slightly, or perhaps just allowed herself to appear so. California is home. The sunshine, the sense of openness, the creativity, it's honestly miles ahead of certain other, more restrictive places. Like England? Al asked gently, putting the unspoken question into the air. Meghan arched a perfect brow. You said it, not me, Al. Al laughed softly, a sound calculated to diffuse the growing edge in her tone. Do you ever miss it? The royal duties, the traditions, the history? She leaned forward, her eyes becoming sharp and laser-focused. Miss it, Al? No one misses being micromanaged by centuries-old, incredibly stifling customs. It's the 21st century. I much prefer building my own traditions without the confines of an inherited hierarchy. Fair enough, Al replied smoothly, maintaining his unruffled facade. Speaking of career shifts, you've had quite a transition over the years. Any real chance you might return to acting in the future? Meghan let out a quiet, mirthless laugh, the kind that never reaches the eyes. People absolutely love to ask that, don't they? I've moved on, Al. I don't live my life in reruns or flashbacks. He smiled thinly. Of course, but you're devoted fans. Fans are wonderful, she said, cutting him off with another rapid-fire reply. As long as they understand boundaries. I'm not a character anymore, Al. I'm a person. There was a brief, palpable flicker of silence before Al replied. Of course you are, he said softly, a touch of genuine empathy in his voice. And we're genuinely grateful you're sharing your story with us this morning. Meghan tilted her head, her smile tightening to a fine wire. Well, she said, her parting shot delivered as the music cue for the commercial break rolled. Some stories are worth hearing directly. Others just keep getting retold by the wrong people. As the cameras faded to black, Meghan adjusted her elegant blazer, her gaze lingering on Al as if daring him to challenge her one more time. The tension was now subtle but unmistakable, like a building static charge just before a major storm. And somewhere in the control room, a producer was whispering what everyone was thinking. This is going to explode before the hour's over. Rising above or pushing back. High voltage. When the broadcast returned from the commercial break, the heavy tension that had settled hadn't dissipated. It had thickened into a palpable cloud. The studio lights seemed a touch brighter, the air noticeably heavier. Al Roker, ever the professional, straightened his tie, still wearing his practiced, reassuring smile. Meghan, in stark contrast, sat perfectly still, her posture regal, her fingers intertwined neatly in her lap, a study in carefully constructed composure. Welcome back to today, Al began, his tone unwavering and smooth. We're here with Meghan Markle, continuing to talk about her important work, her personal journey, and her life after the royal family. Meghan's lips parted in a polite, though chilly, smile. If by after, you mean finally living life entirely on my own terms, then yes, she said lightly, her gaze locked firmly on his. Al chuckled softly, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's a very good way to put it. Now, Meghan, you've spoken a lot about freedom and independence. What does that look like for you in your day-to-day life these days? She tilted her head again, her eyes narrowing just enough to convey a mild challenge. It looks like genuine peace. It looks like waking up in the morning without someone constantly telling me how to behave, what exact shade of color to wear, or precisely how wide I should be smiling for a photograph. Al nodded thoughtfully. That sounds truly liberating. But some have suggested that the media attention and scrutiny haven't really gone away, that, in some ways, it has even dramatically increased. How do you choose to deal with that constant public gaze? Meghan emitted a laugh that was more sharp than warm. Deal with it. I don't deal with it, Al. I rise above it. There's a crucial difference there. People can speculate and invent all they want. It simply doesn't define me or our reality. Her tone now carried that same hint of superiority that had flickered earlier, and Al could feel the distinct, unspoken friction growing between them. Still, he pressed on, choosing his words with surgical precision. You mentioned people speculating, he said, his voice gentle and investigative. A lot of that persistent speculation revolves around your marriage. How are you and Harry genuinely doing these days? Meghan's eyes narrowed further. We're fine. I know everyone desperately wants some kind of juicy headline. Trouble in paradise, or shocking divorce rumors. But I'm sorry to disappoint the rumor mongers. Harry and I are solid, stronger than ever. Actually, we have a real marriage, not a public performance for the papers. Al smiled faintly. That's always good to hear. But there were rumors about the two of you living separately for a while, particularly a few months back. Meghan's tone snapped like a whip. Lies are what the media does best, aren't they? Maybe that's why the public has such deep trouble separating actual truth from baseless fiction. The control room fell silent. Even the floor manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Al, ever the seasoned professional, gave a small, diplomatic chuckle to ease the tension. Well, Meghan, we like to let our guests use this platform to clear the air. It's a core part of why you're here. I didn't come here to clear anything, Meghan interrupted again, leaning slightly forward, her posture rigid now. I came here because people deserve to hear things directly from me, not filtered through headlines written by people who've never even met me. Al gave a non-committal, diplomatic nod, his composure unbroken. Understood. Let's shift gears then, he said calmly. You've successfully built quite a multifaceted platform for yourself here in the States. Podcasts, documentaries, charitable foundations. What's next for you professionally and creatively? Meghan's smile returned, though this time it felt more like impenetrable armor. Next is growth. Evolution. I don't operate on anyone else's timeline, Al. My projects are fundamentally about purpose, not easy profit, but I realize that particular concept might be hard for some people to truly grasp. There it was again, the concealed, barbed jab hidden behind a veil of polite phrasing. AL's expression remained steady, but the control room could collectively sense the storm clouds gathering speed. Well, speaking of purpose, Al said smoothly, moving to the next question. You recently attended a prestigious awards ceremony in London, the same week as a major, high-profile royal event. Some observers suggested the timing felt quite deliberate, a subtle counter-programming move. Meghan blinked, a faintly mocking laugh escaping her lips. You mean to suggest I plan my entire life and career around their calendar? That's truly adorable in its assumption. Al smiled politely, not reacting to the sarcasm. It's just that people notice the overlap. Meghan, people notice everything. She cut in again, her voice ringing with a forced lightness. That's what happens when you live, rent-free, in the public's imagination. But let me be perfectly clear. I am not here to play games with the royal family. I'm here because I earned my place. The sharp edge in her voice was now impossible to miss. AL's eyes flickered toward her, calm but firm. Do you still speak to them? Meghan hesitated for the first time, a fractional pause in her performance. I think some relationships are better left in peace, she said finally, though her tone made it evident she had no intention of elaborating. Specifically with Kate and William? Al pressed gently. The public always wonders if there's been a... I'm not interested in discussing people who are now firmly a part of my past, Meghan said quickly, cutting him off once more. Besides, I find it fascinating that people are still so utterly obsessed with whether I text someone I simply used to share balcony space with. Her sarcasm drew a few uneasy, scattered chuckles from the crew. Al forced a polite laugh, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of genuine frustration. He'd handled difficult, celebrity guests before, but Meghan's complex mixture of practiced charm and casual condescension was unlike anything else he'd encountered. All right, he said finally, his voice smooth, but now distinctly tighter. Let's talk about something much lighter. Your life in America. How does it truly compare to the UK? Oh, it's incomparable, she said instantly, a trace of smugness in her smile. The freedom, the creative energy, the wonderful diversity. It's a far cry from the gray skies and stifling gossip chains of the UK. Here, I get to choose who I am every single day, and I don't have to apologize for a single choice. That sounds truly wonderful, Al said softly, though the slight increase in his formality was a warning sign. Though to be fair, you are quite admired and supported in Britain as well. Meghan tilted her head, her tone now dripping with concentrated sarcasm. Admired? Is that what we're calling it now? I'd say relentlessly scrutinized, publicly villainized, maybe even targeted. But sure, let's call it admiration if it helps people sleep better at night. The words were sharp, delivered with surgical precision. Al's smile faltered just slightly, barely noticeable, but definitely real. He cleared his throat, regaining control with an effort. One last thing before the break, he said, the clip in his voice now evident. There's been speculation about you returning to acting someday. Is that something you'd ever genuinely consider? Meghan gave a dismissive, harsh laugh. Acting? I think I've done enough of that for one lifetime, don't you? The room went completely still. For the very first time, Al didn't immediately respond. He looked down at his notes, then back up at her, meeting her gaze squarely, his own eyes now cold. That's an interesting way to put it, he said finally, his voice level. Honesty is interesting, isn't it? Meghan shot back, a challenge in her eyes. Sometimes, Al replied softly, never breaking eye contact. And sometimes it's just unkind. For a fleeting, nearly imperceptible second, Meghan's eyes flickered, the faintest, most fleeting crack in her polished composure. But then her chin lifted again, her voice returning to its cool, defensive pitch. Well, I've never been one to sugarcoat the truth for someone else's comfort. The segment producer quickly gave the cut signal, but the raw, electric energy in the room refused to settle. Al leaned back in his chair, taking a slow, calming breath. Meghan smoothed her blazer with mechanical precision, her jaw faintly clenched. They were only halfway through the show, but everyone, from the sound technician to the head camera operator, could feel it. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a volatile countdown. The boiling point and the exit collision. When the cameras blinked back on for the third segment, the friendly, inviting facade of the Today Show had all but vanished, replaced by a tense, professional wariness. The glossy studio set, once filled with the warmth of morning banter, now felt more like a pressurized chamber. Even the ambient hum of the lights seemed sharper, more aggressive. Al Roker sat forward slightly, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his tone calm, but now clipped and focused. Across from him, Meghan Markle appeared utterly composed, perhaps too composed. Every movement, every breath was deliberate, as though she were intensely performing for a crucial, invisible audience. Welcome back, Al began, his voice steady and even. We're continuing our conversation with Meghan Markle. And Meghan, I'd like to ask about your widely discussed public image, something that seems to follow you, for better or worse, wherever you go. She gave a faint, knowing laugh. Public image? That's such a convenient, simplistic phrase, isn't it? It makes it sound like there's a dramatic difference between who I am and who people think I am. But I don't wake up in the morning asking anyone permission to be liked, Al. I just exist authentically. Al smiled tightly, his expression challenging. I understand, but I think what people are genuinely curious about is the perceived contradiction. You've often stated you value deep privacy, yet you've shared so much of your personal life through exclusive interviews, documentaries, even books. Some viewers wonder, how do you truly reconcile that choice? Meghan's smile thinned decisively. The famous contradiction question, she said, leaning back. I find it truly fascinating that people have such a hard time understanding basic boundaries. Sharing my perspective and telling my own story doesn't equate to surrendering my privacy to the public. It means taking essential control of the narrative that others tirelessly tried to hijack. Al nodded slowly, choosing his words with surgical care. So in your mind, that's genuine empowerment. In my mind, Meghan echoed, with a soft, dismissive scoff. No, Al, it's not just in my mind. It is empowerment. For far too long, people, and especially women, have been told to stay quiet, to be endlessly grateful, to just smile and nod at what they're given. I didn't move across an entire ocean just to play that stifling role again. Al gave a polite, measured smile. Fair enough. But critics have pointed out that some of your recent projects, like the podcast and the Netflix special, felt more like public rebuttals and counterattacks than personal storytelling. How do you respond to that consistent criticism? Meghan's eyes flashed with indignation. Critics, she said, the word dripping with profound disdain. It's always critics, isn't it? People who sit on their couches judging others for daring to live authentically and speak their truth. I don't need to explain myself to people who only consume carefully edited headlines. The silence that followed was heavy and palpable. Even through the studio glass, producers exchanged worried, panicked glances. Al cleared his throat and tried again, his tone now noticeably softer, attempting a de-escalation. All right, he said. Let's talk about something more reflective, then. When you look back at your brief time with the royal family, what stands out the most to you now, years later? Meghan hesitated for a moment, then folded her arms firmly across her chest. Honestly, the sheer performance of it all, the pageantry, the forced smiles, the crushing weight of expectation. It's theater, Al. It's a very old, beautiful illusion people buy into because it's often easier than facing reality. Everyone wants their fairy tale, and I was simply supposed to play a part in theirs. But that's fundamentally not who I am. Her words landed with undeniable weight. Al leaned back, nodding thoughtfully, a new seriousness in his expression. You've used that word before, performance. Do you think your past career as an actress helped prepare you for that intensely public environment? A dry, bitter smile flickered across her lips. No acting class in the world prepares you for that extreme level of scrutiny. Hollywood, at least, was honest about what it wanted. Ratings, beauty, talent. The palace wanted obedience dressed up as grace. There was an audible murmur from somewhere offset. Al pressed on gently. That's a powerful, sobering statement. Do you think that perception of control and expectation still affects how you see your public role today? I don't see myself as having a role anymore, Meghan replied, her tone hardening further. That's the core of the problem. People constantly like to assign labels. Actress, duchess, activist, villain. It's utterly exhausting. Maybe the world should try understanding me as a complex person instead of just an attention-grabbing headline. Al nodded again, his expression unreadable. You've spoken a lot about the media, Meghan, about control and taking back narratives. But I'm curious, do you think some of that same, intense energy comes from you as well? From the way you choose to respond? From how forcefully you push back? Meghan's eyes narrowed, instantly defensive. Push back? That's a fascinating choice of words, Al. I just mean, Al clarified, speaking more slowly. You've always been outspoken. You've successfully taken control of your story, but at times it seems to create even more controversy. Do you ever worry that your tone, your sharp approach might alienate people who once supported you? Meghan straightened in her seat, her gaze sharpening to a point. You're suggesting that honesty alienates people. I'm suggesting, Al replied calmly, his voice ringing with a subtle authority, that sometimes the delivery matters as much as the message. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. For the first time, her polished composure faltered slightly. So what, Al? I should be more palatable, softer, smile politely through the double standards? I've done that for years, and it decidedly didn't work. Al met her stare evenly. I don't think anyone's asking you to simply smile. Just to recognize that people listen more when they feel mutual respect. The air in the studio grew exceptionally tense. Meghan laughed, but the sound carried no warmth, no humor. Respect goes both ways, doesn't it? Maybe the media should try earning it before demanding it from a guest. Al's jaw tightened ever so slightly, though his voice remained perfectly calm. I think the media's job, Meghan, is to ask questions. Sometimes very difficult ones. Sure, she said, the sarcasm curling around each word like smoke. As long as those questions don't make anyone in the room uncomfortable. He gave a small, weary sigh, glancing briefly toward the control booth before turning back to her. Let's talk about your family, then. Your late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, remains an iconic and beloved figure to this day. Many observers see parallels between your public experiences and hers. Do you ever feel connected to that challenging legacy? For the first time, Meghan's expression hardened completely, transforming into an unyielding mask of anger. Diana deserves peace, Al. She's not a comparison point for your interview questions. I understand, he said gently, trying to recover the ground. I only meant. No, Meghan interrupted sharply, her voice cutting through his. You meant to invoke raw emotion, to paint me as another tragedy waiting to happen on a public stage. I'm not her, Al. I never claimed to be, and I will not be used to resurrect that old narrative. A deep, painful silence filled the room. The cameras continued to roll softly, capturing every flicker of tension. Al sat back, folding his hands once more, the warmth entirely gone from his face. You're right, he said, his tone even and flat. You're not her. But she faced the press with a certain courage. And sometimes, genuine courage isn't about fighting every battle. It's simply about listening. For a moment, Meghan's defensive expression cracked just slightly before she swiftly recovered her composure. Well, she said quietly, her voice low. Maybe I just don't have the patience for endless double standards anymore. Al smiled faintly, his voice measured. Patience isn't a weakness, Meghan. It's a profound strength. Or maybe it's just complacency, she shot back, their gazes locking in a final, unyielding standoff. Two seasoned professionals, each too proud, too secure in their stance to back down. The room seemed to hum with the residual heat of their unspoken words. Then a producer's voice cut faintly through the earpieces, a sound of desperation. One more segment. God help us all. Both of them sat motionless, staring across the table as the clock counted down to the final, inevitable act. The smiles were gone, replaced only by the sparks. The final confrontation and the walkout woman walking. The final segment began under a silence so heavy that even the professional hum of the studio lights seemed reluctant to break it. Cameras refocused with a quiet whir. The producer's voice echoed faintly. We're live in 3, 2, 1. The familiar Today Show jingle faded out, and Al Roker's voice returned, lower, steadier, but undeniably firmer. Now we're back with Meghan Markle, he said, his practiced smile now brittle around the edges. And before the break, we were discussing how media narratives shape public perception. Meghan shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other, the faint, dry scrape of fabric echoing loudly in the quiet studio. Yes, she said, her tone sharp yet measured. Though I think what truly shapes perception more than anything else is conscious bias. And I think we've seen plenty of that on display this morning. Al blinked once, slowly, absorbing the direct attack. Bias. Let's not pretend it isn't there, Al. Meghan said, leaning forward pointedly. Every single time I sit in a chair like this, the questions are exactly the same. Invasive, slanted, designed simply to trap me into defending myself yet again. I came here thinking we'd have a genuine, real conversation about my charity work, my causes, my future, but instead, we're back to the same tired, recycled narratives. Monarchy, Diana, family gossip. It's frankly lazy journalism. The small audience behind the glass, mostly crew members, exchanged uncertain, worried glances. Al maintained his iron composure, though his tone cooled to a polite frost. Meghan, with all due respect, the questions I've asked are the exact same ones millions of viewers at home want answers to. That's not bias. That's transparency and accountability. Meghan tilted her head slightly, an icy smile curling at the edges of her lips. Transparency is a convenient word people like to hide behind when they are really just looking for easy, sensational headlines. That earned a faint, involuntary sigh from Al. I'm not sure that's entirely fair, he said quietly. My job isn't to intentionally provoke, it's to understand and inform. Then maybe try listening instead of interpreting and judging, Meghan shot back, the tension in the studio plunging to zero. Al folded his hands slowly, his usual warm, grandfatherly demeanor now hardened into something quietly restrained but unmistakably firm. I have been listening, he said, his voice low and serious. But what I'm hearing doesn't sound like understanding. It sounds like pure defensiveness. Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. Oh, so now I'm defensive for not tolerating invasive questions? That's convenient. Not invasive, Al replied, his voice calm but challenging. Challenging. There's a difference. You've built a powerful career on speaking truth to power. but it consistently feels like you only want that truth when it comes exclusively from your side. For the first time, Meghan faltered in her delivery. She blinked, then gave a sharp, brittle laugh that was far too loud for the intimate studio space. "Oh, that's rich. You're accusing me of bias." That's precisely what happens when a woman refuses to play small for the media. You twist confidence into arrogance. "Confidence and contempt aren't the same thing, Meghan," Al said evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Something fundamental shifted in Meghan's posture. Her chin lifted, and her voice rose, her carefully constructed performance cracking under the pressure. "Maybe it's time men like you stop deciding what confidence should even look like." "I didn't come here for a lecture, Al. And I didn't come here for condescension," he replied, his tone final and firm. The tension in the studio snapped like a taut wire. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the crew. Meghan stared at him, genuinely stunned that he had finally pushed back with such strength. "Condescension," she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief and simmering fury. "I'm simply standing my ground against a hostile line of questioning." "There's a way to do that," Al said, leaning forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. "Without treating everyone else in the room, myself, the crew, and the viewers, like they are beneath you. This is the Today Show, not Buckingham Palace." The words hit like a hammer blow. Meghan froze, her jaw tightening visibly. For a long, agonizing moment, she didn't speak, just stared at him, a raw, hot fury burning behind her perfectly composed mask. "You're out of line," she said finally, her voice low and trembling with contained anger. "And you're out of patience," Al replied softly, never breaking eye contact. "For everyone but yourself." The ensuing silence was unbearable. The teleprompter operator's hands hovered uncertainly over the console. Then, with slow, deliberate grace, Meghan stood up. It wasn't sudden or chaotic, it was controlled and final. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her microphone pack, and looked directly into the main camera with a tight, glacial smile that barely masked the storm in her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice steady but shaking just at the edges. "This is exactly why I rarely do interviews anymore. Because no matter how transparent or respectful I try to be, people always show their true colors in the end." She turned her gaze toward Al, her eyes narrowing to slits. "You invited me here to talk about my work and my causes, but you really just wanted another royal headline. Congratulations, Al. You got one." Al opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak a single word, Meghan unclipped her microphone, placed it gently but decisively on the table, and uttered her final words. "I think we're done here," she said, her tone clipped and absolutely final. And then she simply walked off the set. The sharp, echoing click of her heels against the polished studio floor rang louder and more commandingly than anything that had been said during the volatile hour. The cameras kept rolling for several seconds, capturing the stunned, frozen faces of the crew and the flicker of disappointment and weariness across Al's usually unflappable expression. Finally, he exhaled slowly, straightened his notes with shaking hands, and turned to face the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low and solemn. "I want to sincerely apologize for what just happened here. Live television is inherently unpredictable, and sometimes emotions take over. That was emphatically not the conversation any of us intended, and I take responsibility for my part in the confrontation." He paused, his expression softening to a tired sadness. "But I will say this. Every guest who chooses to sit in this chair deserves respect, and that respect absolutely goes both ways. This was supposed to be a conversation," he concluded quietly, "not a confrontation fueled by past grievances. I hope moving forward, we can all learn to listen. Really listen, even when we don't like what we hear." The studio remained in stunned silence. No one moved. The teleprompter stopped scrolling. Then, with a deep, professional breath, Al gave the smallest of smiles, weary but genuine. "We'll be right back," he said finally. The screen faded to black. The woman who once married into royalty had just walked out of a major morning television show, and once again, the world was watching her leave. If you thought you'd seen explosive interviews before, this one might just top them all. Do you think Meghan was unfairly targeted by Al's persistent questioning, or did Roker simply refuse to be disrespected and condescended to on live TV? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because what's coming next might just be even more dramatic.